The courtroom smelled of old wood and stale coffee, a scent that clung to my clothes as I sat on the hard bench, staring at the back of David's head. His hair was slicked back, the same way it always was when he wanted to impress someone, but today it looked forced, like he was trying too hard to hold himself together. My hands trembled in my lap, not from nerves, but from the weight of realization. This was the end. Not just of us, but of the version of me who believed love could fix everything. His voice echoed in my mind, sharp and cold, from that final night. No one will ever love someone like you. Those words had carved themselves into my bones, and as the judge droned on about asset division, I wondered if I'd ever stop hearing them. It wasn't supposed to end like this. I'd spent years building a life with David, pouring my heart into every moment, cooking dinners in our tiny kitchen, laughing over cheap wine, planning a future that felt so certain. I was 30, a graphic designer with a cozy apartment filled with plants and sketches pinned to the walls. My friends always said I had an infectious laugh, the kind that made strangers smile in coffee shops. But David, he had a way of dimming that light. Not all at once, but slowly, with little cuts. A comment about my curly hair being too wild, a sigh when I talked about my dreams. I stayed anyway, because I believed in love, the kind that lasts forever. I believed in asterisk us, asterisk dot. The divorce papers were signed that afternoon, and I walked out into the city, the air crisp with autumn. The streets were alive with people, businessmen in suits, mothers pushing strollers, a street musician playing a soft melody on his guitar. I stood at a crosswalk, watching the world move on without me, and felt the ache in my chest grow heavier. David's words replayed again, and for the first time, I wondered if he was right. Maybe I was too much or not enough. Maybe I was unlovable. My apartment felt emptier that night. I sat on the couch, surrounded by the things I loved. My watercolor paintings, the fern I'd nursed back to life, the stack of design magazines on the coffee table, but they didn't feel like mine anymore. I poured a glass of wine, the same kind we used to drink together, and let the tears come. I didn't sob. It was quieter, a slow unraveling. I thought of my mom, years ago, sitting at our kitchen table with a cup of tea, her hands worn from years of work. Kara, she'd said, don't ever let a man tell you who you are. I wished I could call her now, but she'd been gone for 3 years, and the silence of her absence stung almost as much as David's betrayal. The next morning, I woke up with a headache and a resolve I didn't recognize. I couldn't keep living in his shadow. I called Sarah, my best friend, who answered on the first ring. She didn't say much, just listened as I poured out the mess of my heart. When I finished, she said, Kara, you're stronger than you know. Let's start there. We met for coffee at our favorite spot, a little cafe with mismatched chairs and the smell of fresh pastries. Sarah's blonde hair was pulled into a messy bun, and her eyes were fierce with the kind of love that doesn't let you give up. She pushed a cinnamon roll toward me and said, You're not starting over, you're starting asterisk better asterisk. Asterisk? I didn't believe her, not yet, but I clung to her words like a lifeline. I threw myself into work, taking on new clients, spending late nights sketching logos and website layouts. My apartment became my sanctuary again, filled with the hum of my laptop and the soft glow of string lights. I started running in the mornings, not because I loved it, but because the rhythm of my feet on the pavement drowned out the noise in my head. I joined a book club, made new friends, laughed at their stories over glasses of rosé. Slowly, the world started to feel bigger than David. One evening, about 6 months after the divorce, I was scrolling through my phone, sipping tea on my balcony. The city skyline glittered in the distance and the air smelled of rain. That's when I saw it, a photo of David on Instagram, his arm around a woman I didn't recognize. She was younger, maybe mid-20s, with long blonde hair and a smile that seemed too perfect. They were at some rooftop bar, clinking glasses, looking like they belonged in a magazine. My stomach twisted, not because I missed him, but because I hadn't expected it to hurt. I clicked on her profile. Hannah, her name was, and saw the comments under her post. Friends gushing, emojis everywhere. But one comment stopped me cold. A crying face emoji posted under one of my recent photos. I frowned, confused. I hadn't posted much lately, just a few shots of my latest design project and a selfie from a weekend hike. I opened my own profile and found the photo, a candid of me laughing. my curls wild in the wind, the sunset painting the sky behind me. Underneath, Hannah had written, "You're so beautiful. I can't believe someone like him would leave you for someone like me." My heart sank. I didn't know what to feel: pity, anger, sadness. I closed the app and sat there staring at the city lights, trying to make sense of it. David's words echoed again, but this time they felt different, like they belonged to someone else's story. I thought of a moment from my childhood, standing in my grandmother's garden, the smell of lavender heavy in the air. She'd caught me crying over a boy who'd teased me at school, and she'd knelt down, her hands warm on my shoulders. "Kara, the only person who gets to decide your worth is you." I hadn't understood it then, but now, with Hannah's words staring back at me, I felt the truth of it. Over the next few weeks, I noticed Hannah's presence more. She liked my posts, commented on my stories, even sent me a private message once saying how much she admired my work. It wasn't just flattering, it was unsettling. Her comments grew more personal, almost desperate. "I wish I could be as confident as you," she wrote, under a photo of me at a gallery opening. "You make everything look so easy." I didn't respond, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. Why was she so fixated on me? Was it guilt, envy, or something else? I talked to Sarah about it over brunch one Sunday, the cafe buzzing with the clink of dishes and the hum of conversation. I showed her the messages and she leaned back, her fork pausing midair. "Kara, this isn't about you. It's about her. She's living in your shadow and David probably isn't helping." I nodded, but it didn't ease the unease in my chest. I didn't want to be anyone's shadow and I didn't want to be part of their story anymore. That night, I sat at my desk, the glow of my laptop illuminating the room. I opened Instagram and stared, living my best life. It wasn't just a caption, it was a promise to myself. I posted a photo from that weekend, a shot of me in a cafe, my sketchbook open, a cup of coffee steaming beside it. My smile was real, not forced, and for the first time in months, I felt like I was enough. Hannah's response came within minutes. "I wish I could be like you." I stared at the words, my finger hovering over the screen. Part of me wanted to reach out, to tell her she didn't need to compare herself to anyone, but I didn't. This wasn't my battle to fight. Life moved on. I took on bigger projects, traveled to a design conference in Chicago, met people who saw me for who I was, not who I used to be. I started dating again, not because I needed someone, but because I wanted to share the joy I'd found in myself. The city felt alive again, full of possibility, and I was no longer the woman who sat in that courtroom, trembling under the weight of David's words. Then, one evening, as I scrolled through my feed, I saw Hannah's latest post, a tearful selfie, her mascara smudged, the caption raw and unguarded. "I don't know why I'm so sad. I just want to be happy like her." My breath caught. I didn't need to ask who her was. I sat back, the weight of it settling over me. David hadn't just broken me, he was breaking her too. His need for validation, his careless words, they were a pattern, not a mistake. I closed my laptop and walked to my balcony, the city humming below. I thought of my mom's tea, my grandmother's garden, the countless moments that had shaped me. I wasn't David's victim, and I wasn't Hannah's idol. I was Kara, and that was enough. The night air was cool against my skin, carrying the faint scent of exhaust and blooming jasmine from the neighbor's balcony. I leaned against the railing, my hands wrapped around a mug of chamomile tea, the steam curling up into the darkness. Below, the city pulsed, car horns, distant laughter, the steady rhythm of life that never stopped, no matter how broken you felt. Hannah's tearful post lingered in my mind, her words a mirror to the pain I'd carried for so long. But standing there, I realized something. Her sadness wasn't my burden. I'd spent too many years carrying other people's weight, David's insecurities, my clients' demands, even my own doubts. Not anymore. The next morning, I woke early, the sunrise painting my apartment in soft pinks and golds. I sat at my kitchen table, sketching a new logo for a client, the scratch of my pencil grounding me. My phone buzzed and I glanced at it, a notification from Hannah. Another comment on my latest post, a photo of my morning coffee with the caption, "Small joys, big heart." Her words were simple: "You're so inspiring." I stared at the screen, my pencil pausing, inspiring. The word felt heavy, not because it was untrue, but because I knew it came from a place of longing. I didn't want to be her inspiration. I just wanted to be me. I thought of a moment from years ago when I was maybe 10, sitting on the porch with my dad. He was fixing a broken chair, his hands steady with purpose, the air thick with the smell of sawdust. I'd been upset about something trivial, a fight with a friend, a bad grade, and he'd looked at me, his eyes kind but firm. Kara, you can't fix everyone's heart. Sometimes you just have to let them find their own way. I hadn't understood it then, but now, with Hannah's desperation spilling across my screen, I felt the weight of his wisdom. I couldn't save her from David or from herself. All I could do was keep living. My truth.work became my anchor in the weeks that followed. I landed a big contract with a local nonprofit, designing their entire rebrand, logos, posters, a website that felt alive with purpose. I spent long hours in my apartment, surrounded by mood boards and coffee cups, my curls tied back with a scarf. My neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez, would sometimes knock on my door, offering homemade tamales or a story about her grandkids. Her visits were small, ordinary moments, but they reminded me of the life I was building, one rooted in connection, not competition. Sarah noticed the change in me, too. We met for drinks one evening at a rooftop bar, the kind of place David would have loved for its Instagram potential. The city sparkled below us, and Sarah raised her glass, her eyes glinting with pride. You're glowing, Kara. Not because of some guy, but because of you. I laughed, brushing off the compliment, but deep down, I felt it. The woman who'd sat in that courtroom trembling under David's words was gone. In her place was someone stronger, someone who knew her worth. Still, comma. Hannah's presence lingered like a shadow. Her comments grew more frequent, more personal. I love how you make everything so beautiful, she wrote under a photo of my latest design. I wish I could find that kind of passion. Then, one night, she sent a private message that stopped me cold. I don't know how you do it. I'm with him, but I feel so empty. You seem so full of life. I sat on my couch, the glow of my phone casting shadows across the room. My first instinct was to respond, to offer kindness, to tell her she was enough. But something stopped me. This wasn't just about her admiring me. It was about her measuring herself against me, and that was a game I refused to play. I thought of David, of the way he'd always needed to be the center of attention, the way he'd made me feel small to lift himself up. I saw it now, clear as day. He was doing the same to Hannah. His charm, his sharp words, his need for validation. It wasn't unique to me, it was who he was. And Hannah, caught in his orbit, was unraveling under the weight of it. I felt a pang of sympathy, but also a quiet resolve. I wasn't responsible for her pain, just as I hadn't been responsible for his. The next day, I did something bold. I posted a photo of myself at the nonprofit's launch event, standing in front of a banner I designed, my smile wide and unforced. The caption was simple: This is what healing looks like. It wasn't for Hannah or David or anyone else. It was for me. A declaration of the life I'd fought for, the joy I'd reclaimed. The comments poured in. Friends, colleagues, even strangers, celebrating my work, my spirit. Hannah's response came later, a single heart emoji, and for the first time, it didn't unsettle me. It felt like closure, like she was finally seeing me not as a rival, but as a person. Life settled into a rhythm after that. I traveled to Portland for a design workshop, stayed up late talking with new friends over glasses of Pinot Noir. I started running again, not to escape, but to feel the strength in my body. My apartment was alive with color. New plants, new sketches, a bright yellow throw blanket I'd bought on impulse. I was dating someone new, a quiet guy named Mark who worked as a teacher and made me laugh with his terrible puns. It wasn't serious yet, but it didn't need to be. For the first time, I wasn't looking for forever. I was just enjoying the moment. Then, one rainy afternoon, as I sat in a cafe sketching, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from David. My heart skipped, not from longing, but from surprise. I hadn't heard from him in over a year, not since the divorce papers were signed. His message was long, rambling, full of apologies. I was wrong, Kara. I didn't appreciate you. Hannah and I aren't working out. I miss what we had. I read it twice, my coffee growing cold in my hands. I waited for the ache, the pull of old feelings, but It didn't come. Instead, I felt a quiet clarity. I thought of a moment from my early 20s, sitting in a park with my mom, the grass tickling my bare feet. She'd been sick then, her voice soft but steady. Kara, love isn't about holding on, it's about letting go with grace. I hadn't known what she meant until now. David's text wasn't a chance to rewrite the past, it was a chance to close it. I typed my response carefully, my fingers steady. I'm happy for you, David, but I'm no longer a part of your story. I hit send, and as the rain pattered against the cafe window, I felt a weight lift. Not anger, not triumph, but peace. The kind that comes from knowing you're exactly where you're meant to be. I closed my sketchbook and looked out at the city, the streets slick with rain, the lights blurring into a soft glow. Hannah's pain, David's regrets, they were part of their own journeys, not mine. I'd spent so long believing I needed someone else to complete me, but sitting there with my coffee and my art and my heart, I knew the truth. I was enough, and that was the sweetest victory of all. The rain didn't let up. As I left the cafe, my umbrella popping open with a soft thud. The city was a blur of gray and neon, the kind of afternoon that made you want to curl up with a book and forget the world. I walked slowly, my boots splashing in shallow puddles, the weight of David's text still lingering but not heavy anymore. It was like a stone I'd carried for too long, finally set down by the side of the road. I didn't need to look back to know it was gone, Dot. My apartment was warm when I got home, the air scented with the lavender candle I'd lit the night before. I kicked off my boots, hung my coat by the door, and stood there for a moment, taking it all in. The fern in the corner, its leaves curling toward the light, the stack of design books on my coffee table, dog-eared and loved, the faint hum of the radiator. This was my space, my life, and it felt like a gift I'd given myself. I made a cup of tea and sat on the couch, my phone face down on the cushion beside me. I didn't check it. I didn't need to dot. The next few weeks were quiet, but not the lonely kind of quiet I'd known after the divorce. It was the kind that comes when you're at peace with yourself. Work kept me busy. The nonprofit campaign was a hit, and my inbox was full of new inquiries. I spent evenings sketching, sometimes just for fun, letting my pencil wander across the page without a plan. I'd started painting again too, something I hadn't done since college. My latest piece, a watercolor of the city skyline at dusk, hung above my desk, its colors soft but bold. Like the woman I was becoming, Dot Sarah came over one night with a bottle of wine and a story about a disastrous date that had us both laughing until tears streamed down our faces. We sat on my balcony, wrapped in blankets, the city lights twinkling below. She leaned back, her glass catching the glow of the string lights, and said, You know, Kara, I always knew you'd find your way, but seeing it, it's beautiful. I smiled, my heart full. I thought of a moment from high school, sitting in the bleachers with Sarah after a football game, the air crisp with fall, both of us dreaming about the future. She'd always been my anchor, the one who saw me when I couldn't see myself. Hannah's comments slowed after that rainy afternoon, but they didn't stop entirely. A like here, a heart emoji there. I didn't mind anymore. Her fixation had softened, or maybe I just stopped letting it pull me in. I wondered about her sometimes, what her days were like, whether she was finding her own path. I hoped she was. I remembered a time when I was her age, 25, and lost in a relationship that wasn't right for me. I'd sat in a diner with my mom, picking at a plate of fries, my heart bruised from a boy who didn't deserve me. You'll learn, Kara, she'd said, her voice gentle. The hard lessons are the ones that stick. I hoped Hannah was learning too. One morning, as I was getting ready for a client meeting, my phone buzzed with an email. It was from a gallery downtown, one I'd submitted my watercolors to on a whim. They wanted to feature my work in a group show. I stood there, my coffee mug halfway to my lips, my heart racing. It wasn't just about the art. It was about the courage it took to put myself out there, to believe my voice mattered. I called Sarah, and her scream of excitement echoed through the phone, making me laugh so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. The gallery opening was a few weeks later, on a crisp evening that smelled of wood smoke and possibility. I wore a deep green dress, my curls loose and wild, a pair of gold hoops catching the light. The gallery was alive with people, artists, collectors, friends, all mingling under the soft glow of chandeliers. My paintings hung on one wall, their colors vibrant against the white brick. I stood beside them, a glass of champagne in my hand, watching strangers pause to look, their faces softening as they took in my work. It felt like a dream, but it was real, and it was mine. Mark was there too, his quiet presence steadying me. He didn't say much, just stood beside me, his hand brushing mine, his smile warm when someone complimented my art. I liked that about him, his calm, the way he didn't need to fill the silence. We'd been seeing each other for a few months now, taking it slow, letting it unfold naturally. I wasn't looking for a savior or a soulmate. I just wanted someone to share the small moments, like the way the light hit the river on our morning walks, or the taste of his terrible homemade pancakes. As the night wound down, I stepped outside for some air, the city humming beyond the gallery's glass doors. The street was quiet, the air cool against my skin. I thought of David, of his text, of the life we'd planned that never came to be. I didn't hate him anymore. I didn't even pity him. He was just a chapter, not the whole story. I thought of my grandmother's kitchen, the smell of her cornbread baking, the way she'd hum old hymns while she worked. Life's not about what you lose, Kara, she'd said once, her hands dusted with flour. It's about what you build with what's left. I went back inside, the gallery warm and bright, and found Sarah waiting with a grin. You did this, she said, pulling me into a hug. On all of it. I hugged her back, my heart full, and for the first time, I believed her. Not because of the paintings or the praise, but because I'd built a life I loved, piece by piece, through the pain and the doubt. The next day, I woke to a new message from Hannah. It was short, just a few words. Your art is incredible. Thank you for sharing it. I smiled, my thumb hovering over the screen. I didn't reply, but I didn't need to. Her words felt different this time. Not desperate, not envious, but genuine. Maybe she was finding her way too. Life kept moving. I took on new projects, traveled to Seattle for a design conference, spent weekends with Mark exploring hidden bookstores and hole-in-the-wall diners. My apartment grew even more colorful. A new rug, a shelf of pottery I'd made in a class with Sarah, a photo of my mom tucked beside my bed. I ran in the mornings, my breath steady, the city waking up around me. I laughed more, loved more, lived more. One evening, as I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine and the city skyline glowing against the dusk, I thought about the woman I'd been in that courtroom, her hands trembling, her heart broken. She felt like a stranger now, someone I'd known but left behind. I didn't need David's approval, or Hannah's admiration, or anyone else's validation. I had my own. The air was warm, the jasmine blooming again, and I raised my glass to the sky, a quiet toast to myself, to the pain that had shaped me, the strength that had saved me, and the life that was mine to live. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. And in that moment, with the city humming and my heart steady, I knew I'd won. Not against David or Hannah, but for myself. The wine glass felt cool in my hand, its rim catching the last light of the day as I sat there, the city's heartbeat syncing with my own. The balcony had become my sanctuary, a place where I could breathe, think, and just asterisk be asterisk. The jasmine scent mingled with the distant hum of traffic, and I closed my eyes, letting the moment settle over me like a soft blanket. I'd come so far, not just from the courtroom or David's cruel words, but from the version of myself who thought love was something you earned by shrinking. That Kara was gone, replaced by someone who knew her worth, who built a life from the ground up, brick by stubborn brick. The next morning, I woke to the smell of coffee brewing, the machine gurgling in the kitchen as sunlight streamed through my curtains. I'd started a new routine, waking early, sketching before the day got busy, letting my mind wander as my pencil danced across the page. Today's sketch was of the balcony, the jasmine curling around the railing, the skyline a soft blur in the distance. It wasn't perfect, but it felt honest, and that was enough. I sipped my coffee, the mug warm in my hands, and thought of my mom, how she'd always start her day with a cup of black coffee, no sugar, her eyes scanning the newspaper. Mornings are for dreaming, Kara, she'd say, her voice a quiet anchor. I missed her, but I carried her with me in the way I moved through the world, in the way I refused to give up. Work was a whirlwind that week. The nonprofit campaign had caught the attention of a bigger organization, and suddenly I was fielding calls from people I'd only dreamed of working with. I spent late nights in my apartment, my laptop glowing, my desk littered with sticky notes and half empty mugs. Mrs. Alvarez stopped by one evening, her arms full of empanadas, her smile warm as she peered at my chaos. "You're doing big things, mija," she said, patting my hand. "Don't forget to rest." I laughed, promising I would, but the truth was, I thrived in the hustle. It wasn't about proving myself anymore. It was about creating something that mattered. Sarah noticed it too. We met for lunch at a taco truck near her office, the air thick with the smell of grilled onions and cilantro. She was in her work clothes, a sharp blazer over jeans, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. "You're different, Kara," she said, wiping salsa from her chin. "Not just happy, centered, like you know exactly who you are." I smiled, picking at my tacos, the compliment settling deep. I thought of a moment from college, sitting in a dorm room with Sarah, both of us stressed about exams, eating cold pizza, and laughing until we couldn't breathe. She'd always seen the best in me, even when I couldn't. Now I was starting to see it too. Hannah's presence had faded to a whisper by then. Her comments were rare, and when they came, they felt less desperate, more like a nod from afar. I didn't check her profile anymore, didn't need to know what she and David were doing. But one evening, as I scrolled through my feed, I saw a new post from her, a photo of herself at a park, her blonde hair catching the sunlight, her smile soft but real. The caption was simple: "Learning to love me." I paused, my thumb hovering over the screen. There was no crying emoji, no mention of me. Just her, standing in her own light. I liked the post, a quiet gesture, and moved on. It felt like the end of something, not with a bang, but with a gentle closed dot. Mark and I were spending more time together. Our dates a mix of small adventures and quiet nights. One weekend, we drove out of the city to a little town with a farmer's market, the kind of place where old men sold honey from their backyards and kids ran through the grass with sticky faces. We wandered the stalls, sharing a bag of kettle corn, his hand warm in mine. He bought me a tiny ceramic bird, its wings painted blue, and I laughed, tucking it into my bag. "For your shelf," he said, his eyes crinkling. I liked how he noticed the little things. My love for pottery, the way I smiled when I saw kids playing. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something real, something I could hold without fear. The gallery show had opened new doors, and I was invited to speak at a local art event, a panel about creativity and resilience. I was nervous, my hands shaky as I stood in front of the crowd, but as I talked about my journey, losing myself, finding myself, painting through the pain, I felt the room lean in. Afterward, a woman approached me, her eyes bright with tears. "Your story made me feel like I can start over," she said, her voice trembling. I hugged her, my heart full, and thought of my grandmother, her hands kneading dough, her voice steady as she told me to keep going. I was doing that now, not just for myself, but for others too. One night, as I sat at my desk, the city quiet outside my window, I got an unexpected message. It was from David, not a text this time, but an email, long and raw. He wrote about his regrets, how he'd pushed Hannah away, how he was starting to see the damage he'd done. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," he wrote, "but I need you to know I'm trying to be better." I read it slowly, the words sinking in. I waited for the old anger, the hurt, but it didn't come. Instead, I felt a quiet sadness, not for me, but for him. He was still searching for something I'd already found. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I closed my laptop and walked to my balcony, the air cool and sharp. The city stretched out before me, its lights a map of stories I'd never know. I thought of a moment from my childhood, running through a sprinkler in our backyard, my mom's laughter echoing as she watched. "You're unstoppable, Kara," she'd called, her voice bright. I hadn't felt unstoppable then, or for a long time after. But now, standing there, with my life unfolding like a canvas, I knew she was right. The weeks that followed were full of small joys. I taught a painting class at a community center, my students a mix of retirees and shy teenagers, their hands messy with color. I ran a half marathon with Sarah, our breaths puffing in the cold, our laughter carrying us to the finish line. I spent evenings with Mark cooking dinner in his tiny apartment, his terrible singing making me giggle as we chopped vegetables. My apartment was a riot of life. New plants, new art, A photo of me and Sarah at the race pinned to my fridge. One morning. As I sat on my balcony with my coffee, I saw a notification from Hannah. It was a story, a video of her at an art supply store holding up a sketchbook with a shy smile. Starting something new, the caption read. I watched it twice, my heart warm. She wasn't chasing me anymore, she was chasing herself. I raised my mug to the sky, a silent cheers to her, to me, to the messy, beautiful journey of becoming. Life wasn't perfect. There were still hard days, client rejections, lonely nights, moments when doubt crept in. But I'd learned to sit with them, to let them pass without breaking me. I was Kara Johnson, 31 now, with curly hair and a laugh that still made strangers smile. I was a designer, an artist, a friend, a woman who'd walked through fire and come out stronger. And as the sun rose over the city, painting the sky in hues of hope, I knew one thing for certain. I was enough. The sunrise was a quiet miracle, the kind you don't notice until you're still enough to see it. I sat there, my coffee cooling in its mug, the city waking up in soft murmurs below. The skyline was a jagged silhouette against the pink and gold, and I felt a warmth in my chest. Not the fleeting kind that comes with a compliment or good day, but the steady kind that grows when you've made peace with yourself. Hannah's video lingered in my mind, her shy smile a small victory. Not just for her, but for the part of me that had once been lost, too. I didn't need to know her story's ending. I was writing my own that day. I had a meeting with a new client, a small bookstore looking to rebrand. I walked to their shop, the air crisp with the promise of fall, leaves crunching under my boots. The bookstore was tucked between a deli and a yoga studio, its windows crowded with handwritten signs and stacks of novels. Inside, it smelled of paper and ink, the kind of scent that takes you back to childhood afternoons lost in a library. The owner, a woman named Ellen with silver hair and a sharp wit, walked me through her vision, a cozy, inviting brand that felt like coming home. I sketched as she talked, my pencil capturing the curve of a bookshelf, the glow of a reading lamp. You get it, she said, her eyes crinkling. You see the heart of this place. I smiled, my heart full. I was starting to see the heart of a lot of things. Work kept me grounded, but it was the small moments that filled me up. Evenings with Mark, his laughter warm as we bickered over whose turn it was to do the dishes. Mornings running with Sarah, our breaths puffing in the cold. The city a blur of color around us, late nights painting, my hands smudged with watercolor. The apartment quiet except for the soft jazz playing on my speaker. I thought of my dad sometimes, how he'd sit on our porch after a long day, a beer in his hand, his eyes on the horizon. Life's in the details, Kara, he'd say, his voice rough but kind. Don't miss them. I wasn't missing them anymore. One afternoon, I got a package in the mail, a small box with no return address. Inside was a leather-bound journal, its pages thick and creamy, the kind I'd always wanted but never bought for myself. There was a note tucked inside, written in neat, looping handwriting. For your next chapter. Thank you for showing me I could start one too. Hannah. I stood in my kitchen, the journal heavy in my hands, my throat tight. I didn't know how she'd found my address, and part of me wanted to be unsettled, but the gesture felt different. Final, not desperate. I ran my fingers over the leather, picturing her in that art supply store, her smile hesitant but hopeful. I didn't message her, didn't need to. The journal was enough. I started using it that night, filling its pages with sketches, thoughts, fragments of poems. It became a ritual, sitting at my desk with a cup of tea, the city humming outside, pouring myself onto the page. I wrote about the courtroom, the way the air had felt thick with endings. I wrote about David's words, how they'd cut me open, but also set me free. I wrote about my mom, her tea-stained mugs, her quiet strength. I wrote about me, the woman I'd been, the woman I was becoming. It wasn't therapy, not exactly, but it was healing, a way of holding all the pieces of myself without judgment. Mark noticed the journal one evening, his eyes curious as he leaned against my kitchen counter, a glass of wine in his hand. What's in there? He asked, his voice light but genuine. I smiled, closing the cover. Everything, I said. And he didn't push, just nodded, his hand brushing mine as he passed me a plate of pasta. I liked that about him. His quiet respect, the way he let me be without needing to fill the space. We ate dinner on the balcony, the air cool, the city lights a soft glow. I thought of a moment from my early 20s, sitting on a rooftop with a guy I barely knew, chasing a feeling I couldn't name. I wasn't chasing anymore, I was here, present, enough. The art event had sparked something in me, a desire to share more than just my designs. I started a blog, nothing fancy, just a corner of the internet where I wrote about creativity, resilience, the messy beauty of starting over. I posted photos of my paintings, my sketches, the little ceramic bird Mark had given me. People responded, strangers, friends, even Ellen from the bookstore, who left a comment saying, "Your words make me feel seen." It wasn't about fame or followers, it was about connection, about building something real. One evening, as I was updating the blog, I got a notification from Sarah. She'd sent me a link to a post on X, a photo of Hannah at an art show, her sketchbook open, her face lit with pride. The caption was short: "First step, big dreams." I clicked through, my heart warm. There was no mention of David, no crying emojis, just her, standing tall. I thought of my grandmother's garden, the way she'd coax wilted plants back to life, her hands patient and sure. "Everything grows in its own time," she'd say, her voice a soft hum. Hannah was growing, and so was I. Life wasn't without its shadows. There were days when doubt crept in, when a client's rejection stung more than it should, when the silence of my apartment felt too heavy. But I'd learned to sit with those moments, to let them pass without defining me. I thought of my mom, how she'd faced her illness with grace, her hands steady, even as her body weakened. "You're stronger than you know, Kara," she'd said, her eyes bright with love. I carried that now, not as a weight, but as a light dot. One morning, as I ran through the park, the air sharp with winter's approach, I saw a woman sitting on a bench, her face buried in her hands. She looked like she was carrying the world, and for a moment, I saw myself. The Kara from the courtroom. The Kara who thought she'd never be enough. I slowed, my breath puffing in the cold, and approached her. "You okay?" I asked, my voice soft. She looked up, her eyes red, and shook her head. We talked for a while, not about anything big, just life, pain, the way it sometimes feels like too much. I didn't fix her, didn't try to. I just listened. And when she smiled, small but real, I felt something shift in me. I was paying it forward, not because I had to, but because I could dot back home. I opened Hannah's journal, my pencil scratching across the page. I wrote about the woman in the park, about the way her smile had felt like a victory. I wrote about my mom, my dad, my grandmother, the people who'd shaped me. I wrote about David, not with anger, but with clarity. He was a lesson, not a life sentence. I wrote about Hannah, her sketchbook, her courage, and I wrote about myself, the woman who'd learned to love her own company, her own heart. The city was quiet that night, the skyline a soft glow against the dark. I stood on my balcony, the journal in my hands, the air cold but kind. I thought of my mom's laughter, my dad's steady hands, my grandmother's hymns. I thought of Sarah's fierce love, Mark's quiet warmth, Hannah's new beginning. I thought of me, 31, curly-haired, laughing alive. The stars were faint above the city, but they were there, steady and sure. And as I looked out at the world I'd built, I knew one thing for certain. I was home. The stars blinked faintly above the city, their light a quiet promise against the sprawl of neon and concrete. I stood on my balcony, Hannah's journal still in my hands, its leather warm from my grip. The air was sharp with the first real bite of winter, and I pulled my sweater tighter, my breath a soft cloud in the dark. Home. The word felt bigger than my apartment, bigger than the city. It was the space I'd carved out inside myself, a place where I could stand tall, unbroken, whole. I closed the journal, my fingers lingering on its cover, and went inside, the warmth of my apartment wrapping around me like an embrace. The next morning, I woke to the soft patter of rain, the kind that makes the world feel hushed and small. I stayed in bed longer than usual, listening to the rhythm of it against my window, my thoughts drifting. I thought of the woman in the park, her red-rimmed eyes, the way her smile had felt like a shared secret. I thought of my mom, how she'd sit by the window during storms, her hands wrapped around a mug, her face soft with wonder. "Rain's a gift, Kara," she'd say, her voice barely above a whisper. "It washes the world clean." I didn't know if I believed in clean slates, but I believed in new beginnings, and I was living one. I spent the day working from home, my laptop open on the kitchen table, a pot of soup simmering on the stove. The nonprofit campaign was wrapping up, and I was putting the final touches on a series of posters, their colors bold against the gray of the day. My phone buzzed with a text from Mark, a photo of his classroom, his students' artwork taped to the walls. "They're calling you the cool artist lady," he wrote, followed by a winking emoji. I laughed, my heart light. He'd invited me to talk to his class about design, and I'd agreed, nervous but excited. I pictured my younger self, doodling in the margins of my notebooks, dreaming of a life I couldn't yet name. Maybe I could help those kids dream too. Sarah came over that evening, her umbrella dripping as she shook it out in my hallway. She'd had a rough day at work, her boss piling on deadlines, and she flopped onto my couch with a groan. "Tell me you've got wine," she said, her eyes pleading. I grinned, pouring us both a glass, and we sat there, the rain a soft backdrop, talking about everything and nothing. She told me about a new guy she was seeing, a chef with a laugh that made her blush. I told her about the journal, about Hannah's note, about the woman in the park. "You're out here saving souls, Kara," she teased, but her voice was warm with pride. I shook my head, sipping my wine. I wasn't saving anyone, I was just living, and maybe that was enough to ripple out. The weeks slipped by, each one layering new colors onto my life. I spoke at Mark's school, the kids' questions tumbling over each other. "How do you make colors look happy? Do you ever mess up?" Their faces bright with curiosity. I showed them my sketchbook, let them flip through its pages, their fingers smudging the edges. One girl, maybe 12, with braids and a shy smile, lingered after class, clutching a drawing of a flower. "I want to be like you," she said, her voice small. I knelt down, my heart catching. "You don't need to be like me," I told her. "Just be you, that's more than enough." She nodded, her eyes wide, and I thought of my grandmother, her hands in the dirt, her voice telling me I was enough long before I believed it. The blog was growing, not in a viral way, but in a quiet, steady one. People left comments, shared their own stories, divorces, losses, small triumphs. I read every one, my coffee growing cold as I sat at my desk, the city waking up outside. One woman wrote about leaving an abusive marriage, her words raw but hopeful. Another shared a photo of a painting she'd made after reading my post about watercolor. I started hosting virtual workshops, teaching people how to sketch, how to find joy in the act of creating. It wasn't about being perfect, it was about being present, and that felt like a gift I could give. Mark and I were finding a rhythm, our lives weaving together without rushing. We spent a weekend hiking in the mountains, the air crisp, the leaves a riot of red and gold. He carried my backpack when I got tired, his hand steady on mine as we climbed. At the summit, we sat on a rock, the world stretching out below, and he told me about his mom, how she'd raised him alone, her strength quiet but fierce. "She'd like you," he said, his eyes on the horizon. I smiled, leaning against him, the wind tugging at my curls. I didn't need his mom to like me, but I wanted her to. I wanted to be part of his world, not because I needed him, but because I chose him. One evening as I was painting, a new piece, a swirl of blues and greens inspired by the ocean, I got a notification from Hannah. It was a direct message, the first in months. "I'm sorry if I ever made you uncomfortable," she wrote. "I was lost, but I'm finding my way. Your art helped me start. Thank you." I sat back, my brush dripping onto the table, my heart full. I thought of David, of his email, of the way he'd tried to pull me back into his story. I thought of Hannah, of her tears, her sketchbook, her courage. I typed a reply, simple but true. "I'm proud of you. Keep going." I hit send, and the weight of their story, David's, Hannah's, mine, felt lighter. Like a chapter finally closed. Winter settled over the city, the days short, the nights long and cold. I bought a new coat, bright red, and wore it like armor, its color a defiance against the gray. I ran in the mornings, my breath a steady rhythm, the park quiet except for the crunch of frost under my shoes. I thought of my dad, how he'd walk me to school in the winter, his gloved hand holding mine, his voice telling stories to keep me warm. You're tougher than the toughest storms, Kara, he'd say, his grin wide. I was tough, but I was soft too, and I was learning to love both. One night, as I sat on my balcony, a blanket around my shoulders, I opened Hannah's journal and wrote, not about the past, but about the present. The smell of snow in the air, the glow of my apartment, the life I was building. I wrote about the kids at Mark's school, their messy drawings, their fearless dreams. I wrote about Sarah, her laughter, her loyalty. I wrote about Mark, his quiet strength, the way he made me feel seen. I wrote about me, the woman who'd learned to stand in her own light, not because she was perfect, but because she was enough. The city glittered below, its lights a constellation of stories. I closed the journal, my hands steady, and looked out at the world. It wasn't the one I'd planned, not the one I dreamed of in that courtroom, or in David's arms, or even in the quiet moments of doubt. It was better. It was mine. And as the first snowflakes fell, soft and silent, I smiled. My heart a quiet song of victory. Not over anyone, but for myself. The snowflakes drifted down, catching the glow of the streetlights, turning the city into a quiet dream. I stayed on the balcony longer than I should have, the blanket slipping off my shoulders, my breath visible in the cold. The journal lay closed on the table beside me, its pages full of words I hadn't known I could write. I felt like I was holding a piece of my soul, not just in the leather-bound book, but in the life I'd built around it. The snow settled on my eyelashes, and I blinked it away, smiling at the thought of my mom, how she'd stand outside during the first snow, her arms outstretched, laughing like a kid. It's magic, Kara, she'd say, her voice bright with wonder. I felt that magic now, not in the snow, but in me. Inside, the apartment was warm, the radiator humming softly. I lit a candle, its flicker dancing across the walls, and made a cup of hot cocoa, the kind I used to drink as a kid with extra marshmallows. I sat on the couch, my legs tucked under me, and opened my laptop, scrolling through the comments on my latest blog post. People were sharing their stories again. A man who'd started painting after losing his job. A woman who'd found courage to leave a toxic friendship. Their words were raw, real, and I read them slowly, my cocoa steaming in my hands. I wasn't just telling my story anymore, I was part of theirs. And that felt like a responsibility I was ready to carry. The next day, I met Mark for coffee at a little shop near his school, the kind of place with mismatched mugs and a chalkboard menu. He was already there, his coat draped over the chair, his hair slightly messy from the wind. You look happy, he said, his smile warm as he slid a latte toward me. I laughed, wrapping my hands around the mug, the heat seeping into my palms. I am, I said, and it was true. We talked about his students, about the painting class I was teaching, about the trip we were planning to the coast in the spring. He listened the way he always did, not just hearing me, but asterisk seeing asterisk me, and I felt a quiet gratitude for that. Work was a steady hum, the bookstore project taking shape with every meeting. Ellen invited me to their holiday event, a cozy night of readings and mulled wine, and I brought Sarah along, her laughter filling the room as she flirted with the barista. The bookstore was packed, fairy lights strung across the shelves, the air thick with the smell of cinnamon and old books. I stood by my posters, their colors popping against the wood-paneled walls, and watched people mingle, their faces soft with the glow of the season. Ellen pulled me aside, her hand warm on my arm. This place feels alive because of you, she said, her voice steady. I shook my head, but her words stayed with me, a reminder of the mark I was leaving, not just on paper, but on the world. Christmas came, and I spent it with Sarah's family. A loud, chaotic affair with too much food and a game of charades that had us all in stitches. Her mom hugged me tight, her perfume familiar, and I thought of my own mom, how she'd make pancakes on Christmas morning, her apron dusted with flour. You're my gift, Kara, she'd say, her eyes bright. I carried that memory as I helped Sarah's nieces decorate cookies, their hands sticky with icing, their giggles a melody I hadn't known I needed. Mark stopped by later, his scarf dusted with snow, and we exchanged gifts. A book of poetry for him, a tiny painting of the mountains for me. It wasn't grand, but it was us. And that was enough. The new year brought a fresh wave of energy. I signed up for pottery class, my hands messy with clay, the wheels spinning under my fingers. I wasn't good at it, not yet. But I loved the process. The way it forced me to slow down, to feel the weight of creation. I thought of my grandmother, her garden, how she'd talk to her plants as she worked, her voice a soft hum. Patience, Kara, she'd say, her hands in the soil. Good things take time. I was learning that not just with clay, but with myself. One evening, as I was cleaning my brushes after a painting session, I got a notification from the gallery. They wanted to host a solo show for me in the summer, a chance to share my watercolors with the world. I stood there, my hands dripping, my heart racing. It wasn't just about the art, it was about the woman I'd become, the one who dared to dream again. I called Sarah, and her scream echoed through the phone, making me laugh until my sides hurt. You're a freaking rock star, she said, and for once, I didn't brush it off. I felt like one, not because of the show, but because of the journey. Hannah's presence was a faint echo now, her posts occasional but steady, each one a step toward her own light. I saw a photo of her at a cafe, her sketchbook open, a cup of coffee beside it. The caption was simple: mine. I smiled, my heart warm. She wasn't chasing anyone anymore, not me, not David, not some idea of perfection. She was claiming her own story, and I was proud of her, not as a rival or a shadow, but as a woman finding her way. Mark and I grew closer, our lives tangling in the best way. We spent a weekend at his cabin, a tiny place by a frozen lake, the air sharp with pine. We built a fire, the flames crackling, and talked about the future. Not in a heavy way, but in a hopeful one, like planting seeds we'd water later. He told me about his dreams, about wanting to open a community center for kids, and I told him about mine, about traveling to paint, about building a life that felt like art. We didn't need to promise forever. We were building something real, day by day. One morning, as I ran through the park, the snow crunching under my feet, I saw the woman from before, the one who'd been crying on the bench. She was walking now, a dog trotting beside her, her face lifted to the sun. She didn't see me, but I smiled, my breath a steady rhythm. I thought of my dad, his hands fixing that chair, his voice telling me to let people find their way. I was doing that, not just for her, but for everyone. Hannah, David, myself. Back home, I opened the journal, its pages nearly full now. I wrote about the snow, the gallery, the woman with the dog. I wrote about my mom's pancakes, my dad's stories, my grandmother's garden. I wrote about Sarah's laughter, Mark's warmth, the life I was living. I wrote about me, the woman who'd learned to love her scars, her strength, her heart. The city was quiet outside and the snow falling again, and I closed the journal, my hands steady. I stepped onto the balcony, the cold sharp against my skin, the skyline a soft glow. The stars were hidden, but I knew they were there, steady and sure. I thought of all the moments that had brought me here, the pain, the growth, the quiet victories. I wasn't the woman in the courtroom, or the one who'd believed David's words, or even the one who'd started over. I was Kara, 31, curly-haired, laughing, alive. And as the snow fell, soft and silent, I raised my hands to the sky, not for magic, but for me. A woman who was, and always would be, enough. The snow kept falling, a gentle curtain that softened the city's edges, making everything feel hushed and sacred. I stood on the balcony, my hands outstretched, the flakes melting against my palms. The cold was sharp, but I didn't mind. It reminded me I was alive, that I could feel the world in all its raw beauty. I thought of my mom, how she'd dance in the snow, her scarf trailing behind her, her laughter a melody that warmed the winter. Life's too short to stay inside, Kara, she'd say, pulling me out into the yard, our boots crunching in the drifts. I wasn't dancing now, but I was here, present, my heart open to whatever came next. Inside, the apartment glowed with the soft light of my lamp, the journal still on the table, its pages a testament to the woman I'd become. I made a cup of tea, the steam curling up like a promise, and sat at my desk, my laptop open to a blank blog post. I wanted to write about the snow, about the way it felt like a fresh start, but the words didn't come right away. Instead, I thought of the people who'd read my posts, the ones who'd emailed me their stories. A single mom who'd started drawing again, a retiree who'd found joy in poetry. Their courage mirrored mine, and I realized this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about us, all of us, finding our way through the dark. The next morning, I woke to a city blanketed in white, the streets quiet except for the occasional scrape of a snowplow. I bundled up in my red coat and headed to the bookstore, the air stinging my cheeks. Ellen was there, sweeping the sidewalk, her breath puffing in the cold. "You're a trooper," she said, her smile warm as she waved me inside. The shop was a haven, its shelves a maze of stories, the fairy lights still twinkling from the holiday event. We worked on the final pieces of the rebrand, a new website, a set of bookmarks, our laughter filling the space as we debated fonts. "You've got a gift, Kara," she said, her eyes steady. "Not just for design, but for making things feel alive." I smiled, my heart full, and thought of my dad, his hands steady as he fixed that chair, his voice telling me to build something lasting. I was doing that now, one project, one moment, at a time. Mark and I spent the evening together, cooking soup in his tiny kitchen, the windows fogging up from the heat. He chopped carrots with a focus that made me smile, his humming off-key but endearing. We talked about the solo show, about his plans for the community center, about the little things that made us laugh. "You're gonna kill it at that gallery," he said, stirring the pot, his eyes warm. I leaned against the counter, my wine glass cool in my hand, and felt a quiet certainty. I wasn't just preparing for a show, I was preparing for a life. One I'd chosen, not one I'd settled for. Sarah called him the next day, her voice bubbling with excitement. She'd gotten a promotion, a big one, and wanted to celebrate. We met at a bar downtown, the kind with velvet booths and overpriced cocktails, the air thick with chatter and jazz. She wore a red dress, her hair loose, her grin unstoppable. "To us," she said, raising her glass. "The women who don't quit." I clinked my glass against hers, my laughter mingling with the music. I thought of a moment from our teens, sneaking out to a concert, the night air electric with possibility, both of us dreaming of lives bigger than our small town. We'd made it, not in the way we'd planned, but in a way that felt truer. The blog kept growing, its reach small but deep. I posted about the bookstore, about the snow, about the courage it takes to start over. People commented, shared, connected. One woman sent me a painting she'd made, a vibrant abstract inspired by my words. "You made me believe I could try," she wrote. I pinned the email to my wall next to my mom's photo, her smile a quiet anchor. I thought of my grandmother, her hands in the dirt, her voice telling me to keep going. And I was bringing others with me. Hannah's journey stayed in the back of my mind, a soft echo of growth. I saw her post now and then, a sketch of a tree, a photo of her at a pottery class, her hands messy with clay. She wasn't performing anymore, wasn't chasing approval. She was creating, and it showed in the light in her eyes, the steadiness of her captions. "One day at a time," she wrote under a photo of her sketchbook, and I liked it, my heart warm. I didn't need to know her whole story. I knew she was finding her way, and that was enough. The pottery class became a highlight of my week, the studio a warm chaos of spinning wheels and laughter. I made a wonky bowl, its edges uneven but charming, and gave it to Mrs. Alvarez, who displayed it proudly on her kitchen table. "You're an artist in everything, Mija," she said, her hands warm on mine. I thought of my mom, how she'd collect my childhood drawings, taping them to the fridge like they were masterpieces. "You've got a spark, Kara," she'd say, her voice soft. I was starting to believe her. One evening, as I was sketching for the gallery show, my phone buzzed with an email from David. I hesitated, my pencil pausing, but opened it. It was short, not an apology this time, but a reflection. "I'm seeing a therapist," he wrote, "trying to understand why I hurt people. I hope you're happy, Kara. You deserve it." I read it twice, the words settling like snow. I didn't feel anger or sadness or even closure, just a quiet acknowledgement. He was trying, and that was his journey, not mine. I didn't reply and didn't need to. I went back to my sketch, the lines flowing, my heart steady. Spring crept in, the snow melting into puddles, the city waking up with color. I ran in the park, the air fresh with budding trees, the woman with the dog a familiar sight now. She waved sometimes, her smile bright, her dog bounding beside her. I waved back, my breath steady, my legs strong. I thought of my dad, his stories, his belief in me. "You're tougher than the toughest storms," he'd said, and I was, but I was also soft, open, alive. The gallery show loomed closer, my paintings piling up in my apartment, their colors a map of my heart. I wrote in the journal every night, its pages a record of this season. Mark's laughter, Sarah's fire, Hannah's growth, my own quiet triumphs. I wrote about the woman in the park, the kids at the school, the strangers who'd become part of my story. I wrote about me, the woman who'd learned to love her own light, not because it was perfect, but because it was hers. One morning, as I stood on my balcony, the city blooming below, I raised my coffee mug to the sky, a silent toast to the journey, to the pain that had broken me, the strength that had rebuilt me, the love that had held me. The skyline shimmered, the air warm with promise, and I smiled, my heart a steady song. I wasn't just enough, I was everything, and that was the sweetest victory of all. The morning air was soft with spring, the kind of warmth that makes you want to leave your windows open and let the world in. I stood on my balcony, my coffee mug steaming, the city humming with the quiet energy of a new season. The jasmine was blooming again, its scent weaving through the breeze, and I closed my eyes, letting it ground me. I thought of my grandmother, her garden alive with color, her hands coaxing life from the earth. Every season's a chance to grow, Kara, she'd say, her voice a gentle hum. I was growing, not just in the ways I'd planned, but in the quiet, unexpected ways that felt like grace. I spent the day in my apartment preparing for the gallery show. My paintings were spread across the living room, their colors a riot of blues, greens, and golds. Landscapes, abstracts, moments of my heart captured on canvas. I stood back, my hands smudged with paint, and felt a swell of pride. Not the loud kind, but the steady kind that comes from knowing you've poured yourself into something true. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah, a photo of her in a ridiculous sun hat captioned, "Ready for your big day, superstar." I laughed, my heart warm. She'd always been my cheerleader from the days we'd sneak into movie theaters to now when she was planning a whole party for the show's opening. Mark stopped by that evening, his arms full of takeout, his smile easy as he kicked off his shoes. We ate pad thai on the couch, the windows open, the city's hum a soft backdrop. He looked at my paintings, his head tilted, his eyes thoughtful. "These aren't just pictures," he said, his voice quiet. "They're you." I blushed, brushing off the compliment, but his words stayed with me, like a melody I couldn't shake. I thought of my mom, how she'd frame my childhood scribbles, her hands careful as she hung them on the wall. "You've got a gift, Kara," she'd say, her smile bright. I was starting to believe her, not because of the show, but because I could see myself in the colors, the brush strokes, the light dot, the bookstore project wrapped up that week, and Ellen invited me to a small thank you dinner at her house, a cozy place filled with books and mismatched furniture. She poured wine, her silver hair catching the candlelight, and toasted to new beginnings. "You didn't just design a brand," she said, her eyes warm. "You gave us a story." I smiled, my glass raised, and thought of my dad, his hands steady as he built that chair, his voice telling me to leave things better than I found them. I was trying, and it felt like enough. The blog was a quiet constant, its words a bridge to people I'd never meet. I wrote about the gallery show, about the fear and joy of putting myself out there, about the way art had saved me. The comments poured in, a teacher who'd started sketching with her students, a widower who'd found solace in watercolor. I read them late at night, my tea cooling, the city quiet outside. One woman wrote about her divorce, how my posts had given her courage to start over. "You made me feel less alone," she said, and I pinned her words to my heart next to my mom's smile, my grandmother's wisdom, my dad's strength. Hannah's journey was a faint glow now, her posts a steady rhythm of growth. I saw a photo of her at an art fair, her booth filled with sketches, her smile wide and unforced. "This is me," the caption read, and I liked it, my heart full. She wasn't chasing shadows anymore, wasn't measuring herself against anyone. She was Hannah, and that was enough. I thought of a moment from my early 20s, sitting in a cafe with a sketchbook, my heart bruised but hopeful. I'd found my way, and so had she. Mark. And I planned our trip to the coast, a weekend of salty air and quiet beaches. We talked about it over breakfast, his kitchen warm with the smell of pancakes, his terrible puns making me laugh. "You're gonna love the ocean," he said, flipping a pancake with a grin. I leaned against the counter, my coffee mug warm in my hands, and felt a quiet certainty. I didn't need the trip to be perfect. I just needed it to be ours. I thought of my parents, how they'd drive us to the lake every summer, my mom's laughter mingling with the waves, my dad's stories filling the air. I carried them with me, not as weight, but as light dot. The pottery class was a messy joy, my hands learning the rhythm of the wheel, my bowls less wonky with each try. I made one for Sarah, its glaze a deep blue, and she hugged me tight when I gave it to her, her eyes bright. You're too much, Kara, she said, her voice thick. I laughed, shaking my head, but her words settled deep. I was enough, not too much, not too little. Just me, Dot. The gallery show was a week away, and I felt the nerves creep in, a quiet hum under my skin. I painted late into the night, my apartment a chaos of canvases and coffee cups, the jazz on my speaker a steady companion. I thought of the courtroom, the way my hands had trembled, the weight of David's words. I thought of the woman I'd been, the one who'd believed she wasn't enough. She was gone, replaced by someone who painted her heart, who loved her life, who stood tall in her own light dot. One morning, as I ran through the park, the air fresh with spring, I saw the woman with the dog again. She was laughing now, tossing a ball, her face alive with joy. I slowed, my breath steady, and waved. She waved back, her smile a shared victory. I thought of my dad, his gloved hand holding mine, his voice telling me I was tougher than the toughest storms. I was, and I was soft, too. And I loved that about myself. Back home, I opened the journal, its pages a map of this journey. I wrote about the gallery, the nerves, the hope. I wrote about Mark's pancakes, Sarah's laugh, Hannah's sketches. I wrote about the woman in the park, her dog, her joy. I wrote about my mom's snow dances, my dad's stories, my grandmother's garden. I wrote about me, the woman who'd learned to love her own heart, not because it was perfect, but because it was hers. The city bloomed outside, the skyline, a soft promise against the dawn. I closed the journal, my hands steady, and stepped onto the balcony, the air warm with jasmine. The stars were faint, but they were there, steady and sure. I thought of the pain that had shaped me, the strength that had saved me, the love that had held me. I wasn't just Kara, 31, curly-haired, laughing alive. I was a story, a song, a light. And as the sun rose, painting the sky in hues of hope, I raised my hands to the world, not for victory, but for joy. A woman who was and always would be enough. The sun rose slowly, its light spilling over the city, painting the skyline in hues of hope. I stood on my balcony, the air warm with jasmine, my hands raised to the world, not in triumph, but in joy, a quiet celebration of the woman I'd become. The journal rested on the table behind me, its pages full of my heart, and I felt a stillness settle over me, the kind that comes when you've walked through fire and found your way to the other side. I wasn't just Kara, 31, curly-haired, laughing, alive. I was a story, a song, a light. And as the city woke below, I knew the gallery show wasn't just a moment. It was a milestone, a marker of how far I'd come. The week of the show was a blur of final touches. I spent mornings in my apartment, framing paintings, my hands steady despite the nerves humming under my skin. Afternoons were for meetings with the gallery curator, a kind woman named Lila who saw the stories in my brushstrokes. These aren't just paintings, Kara, she said, her glasses slipping down her nose as she studied a canvas of a stormy sea. They're a journey. I nodded, my throat tight, and thought of my mom, how she'd sit with me as I drew, her hands warm on my shoulders. You paint what you feel, Kara, she'd say, her voice soft. I was painting now, not just for me, but for everyone who'd ever felt lost and found their way. Sarah was a whirlwind of support, organizing everything from the guest list to the wine. She showed up at my apartment one evening, her arms full of fairy lights, her grin unstoppable. We're making this magical, she declared, untangling the strands with a laugh. We hung them around my paintings, the soft glow turning my living room into a preview of the gallery. She stepped back, her hands on her hips, and looked at me, her eyes fierce with love. You're ready, Kara. You've been ready. I hugged her, my heart full, and thought of a moment from our youth, sitting on her bedroom floor, dreaming of lives we couldn't yet imagine. She'd always believed in me, even when I didn't. And now I was starting to believe too. Mark was quieter in his support, but no less steady. He helped me carry canvases to the gallery, his hands careful, his presence a calm anchor. The night before the show, we sat on his couch, a pizza box open between us. the TV playing a movie we weren't watching. You nervous? He asked, his eyes searching mine. I nodded, picking at a slice. Not about the art, I said, my voice soft. About what it means. He reached for my hand, his fingers warm, and didn't say anything, just held me in the silence. I thought of my dad, how he'd sit with me after a bad day, his presence enough to make the world feel right. Mark was like that, not fixing me, but holding space for me to grow. The gallery show was everything I dreamed and more. The space was alive with people, friends, strangers, artists, all mingling under the chandeliers, their voices a soft hum. My paintings hung on the walls, their colors vibrant, each one a piece of my heart. I wore a deep blue dress, my curls loose, my gold hoops catching the light. Sarah was there, her red dress a beacon, her laughter carrying across the room. Mark stood beside me, his hand brushing mine, his smile quiet but proud. Ellen from the bookstore came, her silver hair glowing, and Mrs. Alvarez, her arms full of flowers she'd brought from her garden. I moved through the crowd, my heart racing but steady, their words washing over me. These are incredible. You've got something special. I feel this. Then, near the end of the night, I saw her. Hannah. She stood by a painting of a sunrise, her blonde hair pulled back, her face soft with something I couldn't name. She wore a simple green dress, her hands clasped in front of her, a sketchbook tucked under her arm. I froze, my breath catching, not because I was afraid, but because I hadn't expected her to be here. She looked up, our eyes meeting, and for a moment, the room faded. There was no anger, no jealousy, just two women who'd walked through the same storm and come out different. She approached me, her steps hesitant, her smile small but real. I saw the show announced online, she said, her voice quiet. I had to come. Your work, it's beautiful. I nodded, my throat tight, and saw the weight in her eyes. Not the desperate longing from before, but a quiet strength. I'm sorry, she said, her words barely above a whisper. For everything. I was lost and I made it about you. But you showed me I could find myself. I reached out, my hand on her arm, and felt a release, not just for her, but for me. You're doing it, I said, my voice steady. That's what matters. She nodded, her eyes bright with tears, and slipped away into the crowd, her sketchbook a quiet promise of her own story. I stood there, the gallery humming around me, and felt a shift. Hannah wasn't my shadow anymore, and I wasn't hers. We were just women, finding our way, and that was enough. I thought of my grandmother, her hands in the dirt, her voice telling me to let things grow in their own time. I had, and so had she. The show was a success, the paintings selling faster than I'd expected, the gallery buzzing with talk of a second one. But it wasn't the sales that mattered, it was the feeling, the knowledge that I'd put my heart on the walls and been seen. I went home that night, my apartment quiet, the fairy lights still glowing. I sat on the couch, my dress crumpled, my heart full, and opened Hannah's journal. I wrote about the show, about Hannah's visit, about the woman I'd become. Not perfect, but whole. David's absence was its own kind of justice. I heard through a mutual friend that he'd moved to a new city, his relationship with Hannah long over, his charm fading under the weight of his own regrets. He was working a desk job, no longer the center of attention, his sharp words dulled by the truth he couldn't escape. He'd lost more than me. He'd lost himself. I didn't wish him pain, didn't need to. His life was his own consequence, a quiet defeat that needed no fanfare. I thought of his emails, his apologies, his attempts to rewrite the past. They didn't matter anymore. I had written my own ending, and it was better than anything he could offer. Life after the show was a new chapter, not a finish line. I kept painting, my apartment a riot of color, my canvases spilling onto every surface. The blog grew, its community a tapestry of stories, each one a reminder that I wasn't alone. I taught more classes, not just pottery and painting, but workshops on resilience, on finding joy in the small things. My students were a mix of ages, teenagers with shy smiles, retirees with steady hands, all of them learning to create, to heal. I thought of the girl from Mark's class, her flower drawing, her quiet dream. I was helping her and others like her not by being perfect, but by being real. Mark. And I grew closer, our trip to the coast a memory we carried into summer. We walked the beach, the waves cold against our feet, his hand warm in mine. We didn't talk about forever, but we didn't need to. We were building something day by day, laugh by laugh. Sarah was thriving. Her promotion a spark that lit up her life, her new boyfriend a steady presence who made her smile. Mrs. Alvarez kept bringing me tamales, her stories a gift I cherished. The woman in the park was a regular now, her dog a bounding joy, her laughter a reminder of what healing looks like. I ran every morning, the park alive with summer, my breath steady, my heart strong. I thought of my parents, their love, their lessons, my mom's snow dances, my dad's stories, my grandmother's garden. They were with me not as ghosts, but as roots, grounding me in every step. I thought of Hannah, her sketchbook, her courage. I thought of David, his quiet defeat, a story I no longer needed to read. One evening, as the sun set, I stood on my balcony, the city glowing below, the jasmine heavy in the air. I held the journal, its pages full, its leather worn from my hands. I didn't write this time. I just stood there, my curls catching the breeze, my heart a quiet song. I thought of the courtroom, the pain, the woman who'd believed she wasn't enough. I thought of the gallery, the paintings, the woman who'd learned she was everything. I raised the journal to the sky, not as a gesture, but as a promise to keep growing, keep loving, keep living. The stars blinked above, their light a quiet truth. I smiled, my eyes on the horizon, and whispered to myself, "This is enough.